Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Pollack, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, reporting. Welcome to another edition of the Goldwater Report. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for tuning into the Critical Post. We appreciate it. We hope you spread the word about the Critical Post, because word of mouth is the way this news delivery platform will gain more prominence in the minds of the good folks in America. This platform is here to analyze what's in the yellow journalism propaganda press and fear pornography alternative press news feeds, as well as create original investigations into items of interest that have a direct influence on what's most important in terms of things that people are personally exposed to, namely the money in your pocket and how currency velocity throughout the world flows into your pockets and affects your families. Now, we have a new investigation in the making surrounding the life and times of one Ms. Dewana Breedlove, stepdaughter to the famous multiple land speeds record holder during the 60s and 70s, Mr. Craig Breedlove of the Spirit of America fame. On the surface of it, the facts point to a murder mill aimed at bilking untold hundreds of millions of dollars a year into the pocket of probate administrators aided by the courts, as well as a connection to clandestine Iranian influences nested here in America after the ouster of the former Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and the interests, too, of Imelda Marcos. The construction of private prisons and the acquisitions of hospitals and hospices in the state of California made by funds funneled through proxies for the aforementioned two fortunes of Imelda Marcos and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Now, in this particular broadcast, we'd like to turn our attention to the presidential campaign of Donald Trump. Now, why this is important to the American public is because Mr. Trump is shaking up the highly monetized interests controlling your voting options. As false as these voting options are in this country, because you have no way of forming a negative on the choices which are being forced upon you to consider, Mr. Trump's campaign is tapping into the anger that Americans have for the corrupted reporting and the socialist condescension coming from the major media corporate conglomerates. He's also tapping into the nationalist feelings that many blue-collar folks in this country still have for America. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, any voice advocating any kind of automatic Social Security tax or income tax deductions from your paychecks or the police action tyranny emanating from the corrupt IRS is socialism. It's socialism speak and socialism mindset. In the opinion of this anchor desk, Mr. Trump, along with every other political operative speaking in socialistic terms, no matter who they are in the yellow journalism propaganda press, left, right, and center, or the fear pornography alternative media, which advocates the taxing of your body and its labor, which is your private property, is in effect a forced confiscation of a healthy portion of your ability to retain money. As we stated in our last report, if you include health insurance for people earning $100,000 a year or less, the effective aggregate tax rate upon your gross income is darn near 65%. Having said all that, and turning our focus on Mr. Trump, though he speaks the language of socialism, along with all the members of the aforementioned press, what Mr. Trump has been saying, and we have watched every speech this man has made, in summation, is in the following statements, as we shall note very shortly hereafter. However, before we get into the list, there is one salient fact that needs to be addressed. The fact is about the tail wagging the dog. Corporate contributions to the political process, along with those streaming in from America's uber wealthy donor class, living in the richest zip codes of America, for the most part, is what is driving public policy here in America and overseas in our foreign policy. They're paying the most for the government they want. They're the highest contributing taxpayers to America's treasury. So there's no wonder as to why America tilts in the direction it does, which is away from the common folk and towards the interests of these highly monetized positions. So, in the case of Mr. Trump, when he says he wants to build America's military to be so strong, no country will want to mess with it, though he may be right, and he may be entirely serious about it. What that statement does is throw a fig leaf to American-founded transnational defense contractors in all sectors of weapons technology, alongside of whom those benefit from corporate wars of choice, like food producers, technology producers, and others. Corporate wars of choice have been occurring since the turbulent days of Vietnam and have never ceased. They are still in continuation as we speak today. On the other hand, Mr. Trump also proclaims he's not financed by any of these interests, and that he will not be influenced by any special interest or corporate money like all the rest of the candidates, which, if he's serious, says that he's putting the donor class and corporate donors alike on notice and telling them, your days during my presidency, if it is to be, are numbered. The question is, though it may sound good to interpret things this way, does Mr. Trump mean it? Assuming Mr. Trump could be elected for 2 terms, the only thing any of this will accomplish is a well-needed and well-deserved rest that the American people need from the incessant march of growing and sometimes permanent unemployment, and somehow a respite from the tower of lies emanating from congressional voices of both parties, after which a return to the old trajectory will most assuredly commence in earnest to continue its march. Regardless of all that, here's the list as we've found it, and Mr. Trump's core issues, which he continues to stay laser focused on message about. He says he'll build a wall that will stop border crossing of illegal immigration coming from the southern portion of the United States. He says he will deport illegal immigrants in America back to their origins. He says he will overhaul the Veterans Administration to take optimal care of American veterans who've come home from war. He says he will renegotiate all of America's old, worn out international trade treaties and reduce corporate tax rates to repatriate money being held offshore by these same American founded transnationals, which he cites is somewhere along the lines of $2.3 trillion. And to do this, install America's toughest and best business leaders to handle the trade negotiation. He says he'll impose tariffs on American-founded big businesses who are trying to import goods back into the United States from their manufacturing bases in China, Japan, and Mexico, or force them back into the country to create American jobs instead of keeping them out of the country's borders. He will pass new tax legislation, reducing the forced confiscation of personal income taxes and corporate gains taxes, as well as closing the loopholes that hedge fund managers have been taking advantage of for many years. He says he'll repeal the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act and eliminate Congress mandating insurance markets by imposing monopolistic border protections that insurance companies have been enjoying during our entire lifetime. He will renegotiate the Iran nuclear treaty with the United States. He will rebuild America's military to make it undisputedly the strongest in the world, all the while using American military might in a manner that's more smarter and more cunning in fashion. He says he will crush the radical Islamic elements battling in the Middle East to create a caliphate. He says he will support the state of Israel to remain exactly as it is. He says he will refurbish America's interstate roads and bridges. He will overhaul regulations, especially those emanating from the EPA, which are oppressing American business and budding entrepreneurs from forming new businesses. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be quite a task. There are 645 bureaucracies inside the federal Leviathan, which have been passing statutes and regulations without really any effective oversight from Congress since they've been installed. He says he will get rid of Common Core in America's publicly funded school systems. He says he will get rid of the Dodd-Frank Act, encumbering lending from the banks to entrepreneurs. And finally, amongst other things we've noticed, uphold the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, guaranteeing the rights of the citizens to bear arms. He speaks about certain personal observations. He says the press is completely dishonest, and we couldn't more heartily agree. Political candidates who take money from highly monetized individuals and corporations are controlled by those very same interests. He says certain other personal attacks on other political operatives, mainly Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, as the last two most incompetent secretaries of state. Citing Hillary Clinton as being a criminal, but being protected by the Democratic Party operatives within the current administration and the Department of Justice. And he says he's going to halt all Muslim immigration temporarily and focusing on what is happening within the American Muslim community and the current mosques operating within the United States. That's about most of the summation that we have noticed emanating from his campaign message. Now, in the opinion of this anchor desk, what people are witnessing in Mr. Trump's persona on the campaign stage is the reemergence of the quintessential American warrior statesman. He's channeling the archetypes depicted in the characters and lives of two of America's most successful generals of the 20th century, General Douglas MacArthur and George C. Patton, especially, and more focused on General Patton. Some in America find this fiery rhetoric, albeit unnerving. The pseudo-journalists on America's TV and radio airwaves are in constant condescension at that portion of the American population backing Mr. Trump, telling them in their not-so-informed or considered opinions he's unelectable, especially those voices from the women's electorate, citing his brashness as something abhorrent. What these media types don't seem to comprehend is that they're exposing who and what they really are. They're dyed-in-the-wool old Democrats from the progressive left of 50 years ago. They're FDR Republicans. All of them, whether Democrat or GOP-leaning commentators. In conclusion, the corruption that Americans have been acclimatized to is eating away at the core of American traditionalism. The American values of private property have been so eroded in the minds of the people, an average American very rarely, if ever, considers the idea of IRS confiscation as an issue they should contend with. Rather, they submit without a whimper of disgust or reprisal. Such is the sad state of America's people. They've been so indoctrinated, they can't find the will to muster the courage to shrug off this attack on private property. So much so that even the conservative firebrand Mark Levin has been having a hard time getting them to take up his issue for a convention of the state idea. Though millions every night across America listen to Mr. Levin's broadcasts. Until such time occurs, America will continue to lurch left until eventually a new kind of communism may occur, though we don't know exactly when that will be. Probably, though, perhaps in the next 50 years and a long time after I'm gone. That's when the next generations coming up behind the boomers like myself will see it, and it's going to emerge its ugly head. Totalitarianism, aided by corporate fascism, is going to be the rule of the day, and that's my prediction. Well, thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, for watching another edition of the Goldwater Report. If we're not back on the airwaves before the holidays are over, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, wishing you and yours a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That is all.